Hi class, we're going to try the seminar in social psychology YouTube presentation of the topic of threats to internal validity. This is really a continuation of a topic that we didn't have enough time last lecture to cover. So I'm going to pick up where we left off. If you remember, threats to internal validity have to do where we have a single, or in some cases multiple groups, where there's a before and after, a pre-test and post-test. There's an intervention or program that comes between those 2 points in time. The question is whether appreciable results, increases in the post-test score, can be attributed to the program, or whether there is some other factor at play. And we talked about some other possibilities in the last class. We talked about history, which refers to some event that occurred between the pre and the post-test that's unrelated to the treatment or intervention. Maturation, it's possible that there is some just natural maturity that has taken place among the participants. We talked about testing. Testing has to do with the time interval between the pre and the post. If it's too small, then the people that are responding to the post-test may in fact recall some aspects of the pre-tests. Where we left off was instrumentation, and I'm going to go through that. We may have just started that briefly. Instrumentation, and you can refer to your handout that I emailed, and this was the overhead page that I showed as well. Instrumentation is where there's a different measure that's used for the pre-test and the post-test. It's quite possible that the pre-test utilized a measure that was not refined or somewhat primitive, may not have the requisite psychometric properties of reliability and validity, and the researchers or program administrators realize that, and before they take the post-test, they want to develop a new and improved measure. So they make certain changes in the post-test that make it fundamentally, even though it's fundamentally the same construct, but the level of precision, the way that it's operationally defined, has been adjusted. So that is known as instrumentation. So the question is, differences between the post-test and the pre-test, are they attributable to a more precise instrument, or are those changes in fact the result of the program or intervention? Besides the psychometric properties of reliability and validity that we're all familiar with, there are some other artifacts that we have to take into consideration, artifacts of measurement. This is known as ceiling and floor effects. A ceiling effect is where there's a cap on a given score on a measure that cannot be exceeded. That's what a cap is. On the other hand, we may also have a possibility of a floor effect. And a floor effect is where a score cannot go below a certain point, yet there might be some individual differences among the participants if that measure could have theoretically been below that point. An example of this that we might be familiar with is the SAT. The SAT has a range on each section of between 200 and 800. They say that if you write your name on the answer sheet, then you already get 200 points on each section. So that is what we refer to as a floor effect. The problem is that not all 200s people who score 200 or 250 for that matter are created equal. And this may go back, if you joggle your memory a little bit, you know that there are different levels of measurement. And there's a difference between the interval level of measurement and the ratio level of measurement. And a ratio level of measurement has the feature of an absolute 0 point. The SAT, as mentioned, does not have an absolute 0 point. Therefore, it's subject to a floor effect. What could very well happen is that that floor effect may mask individual differences, and you may have somebody who knows a little bit about scholastic aptitude at the 12th grade level and just decides to check out and not take the test seriously. On the other hand, you may have someone who's not even in the in the ballpark. Someone who, let's say, is a second grader. Very few second graders would be taking the SAT. So if you just looked at their score, they may in fact have an equivalent score as the starting point. However, it's possible that what was really playing a role is the floor effect. In fact, it's very possible that the person who is in 12th grade may be quite more advanced than the second grader. So those are examples. That's an example of a floor effect. The ceiling effect is really just the going in the opposite direction. Statistical regression is an interesting one because you may have heard of the phrase regression towards the mean. Regression towards the mean simply means that after a repeated number of observations or measurements, there's a tendency for the individual to achieve a score that is close to his or her typical performance. There's a gravitation to what is more typical or a mean. We know that a mean is an index of central tendency. An example that I draw from at times is from baseball. If you're familiar with baseball, one of the statistics that's used to track performance of hitters is batting average. Batting average is simply the number of hits that the person has achieved, has recorded, over the number of total at-bats, the total official at-bats. So therefore, if the person at the very beginning of the season has had 5 at-bats and has been able to get 3 hits, then that's 3 out of 5, 60% or .600. We would refer to that as batting 600. They use 3 decimal places in baseball if you're not familiar with batting average. What regression towards the mean is that over a repeated number of observations over time, that 600 batting average, and for your information, 600 batting average over a season, it has never been done. Neither has 500. There have been a couple of players that have achieved 400. But the point is that it's impossible, virtually impossible, for this individual who may have a career batting average of 300, which is a little bit more reasonable, 300 is still pretty good, that individual over the course of a season, that person's batting average is going to be certainly less than 600, but probably a lot closer to 300, meaning that for every 3 times the person gets at bat, on average, every 10 times the person gets at bat, the person will get 3 hits. Selection. So that's statistical regression. Next on the handout is selection. Selection is an issue where you have more than one group. It could be that there is no group equivalence on an important factor going into the evaluation. So you have 2 groups. Ostensibly, those 2 groups are going to be equivalent on the factor of interest going into the study. Based on the pretest, you would expect their scores to be the same. An example is, let's say you have 2 groups. One group from the organization is the marketing department. And they are going to, the program in question is a training program on interpersonal skills. The possibility exists that the training program of interpersonal skills may work for the marketing department. Marketing may have an existing interpersonal skill set, yet may not work for the finance department. So what we may have is a difference on the mean difference between the two groups on the post test, but how much of that was a result of selection? It could be that we selected people from one department to go into the we selected people from both departments to go through the program, but it's possible that differences on the measure of interest may reflect something about each of the groups going into it. Maybe there is some sort of self-selection, that people who go into marketing are by nature better in their interpersonal skills. So there is the concept of self-selection. Mortality is also known as attrition. Mortality generally has a connotation of death, but here we're not talking about death necessarily, although that might be an issue in a study or a program, of a program. Anytime you end up with a group at the end that's smaller than the group that you started with, then you have attrition. You have to consider a couple of different questions before moving on in your study and conclusions. Number one, why did the people drop out? Was it related to the treatment or not? If it was related to the treatment, then you may have an issue. Maybe they had some sort of adverse reaction to the treatment. Number two, is the final sample that we are left with, is that going to be representative of the population of interest? It could be that those who stayed in a program, a managerial skills training program, benefited from the program because they were motivated. So at the end, they were the ones who stuck it out, and therefore your conclusion may have initially been that the training program is of value, when in fact the people that showed appreciable gains of having received the training program may have in fact just been more motivated than the people that dropped out. So it's kind of like a survivor type of phenomenon. The next, if you follow on your list, are various interactions that can take place where you have more than one factor at play, and interactions with selection can be an issue that you have to contend with when interpreting the results. Selection maturation, and here we're talking about two or more groups. Selection maturation is where experimental groups are maturing at different speeds. For example, if you compared lower and middle income children after some program, some sort of, let's say, remedial reading program, it could be that the middle class children just by nature make faster gains than the lower income children because of something that's related to their socioeconomic status, perhaps nutrition or education and such. So that's selection maturation, where there can be an interaction between those two factors. Selection history is that where one group may experience an event and the other did not. Let's say if one was in a neighborhood where there were serious crimes committed, they may have some thwarted maturation that takes place. So that can kind of throw a wrench into what we're talking about. Next we have selection maturation, and we're going to pick up with that in the next YouTube click.